The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge and arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, "What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?' So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." The Gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. So when I was growing up in Michigan, I knew this farmer who moonlighted as a TV repairman. He and his wife lived outside the city in a modest 2-bedroom farmhouse surrounded by barns, balers, and broadcast cedars. He was a proud Republican. He was faithful, anything but simple, and could be quite direct when he needed to be. And despite being a TV repairman, he didn't own one. It was almanacs and AM radio all the time. Bob was also my acolyte master. He had the difficult task of explaining the timing of the liturgy to us prepubescent boys, whilst we remain enamored with the fact that someone had actually given us fire to carry around inside a building. In my day, we sat out of the way, like in one of the transepts of the church, and whenever we were out of earshot of the congregation, Bob never missed a chance to explain to us what was going on in the liturgy. I loved how he used to tell people how he came to the church. He'd often say, "I just picked the one with the tallest steeple." Once at home there, he made it his. He raised his kids in that church, and when the winds of change ushered in a new paradigm in theology, he remained open. He remained open towards the new prayer book, towards the ordination of women, and open towards the inclusion of all people in the place that he and Shirley called home. Bob is what you might call a rooted person. And he stayed even when those of his own family left to join what they considered institutions with a stronger moral track record. He stayed when the altar was moved out from the wall into the nave platform, when folks decided to paint the doors red, and when the church called its first female rector. And when it came time for me to head off to seminary, Bob shook my hand and he said, "You know, Nick, I'm not going to say make us proud. We already are. But listen to this. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few." That was code for him and I, because for the past 5 years, him and I had went to jail to minister to folks there. I'd prepare the bulletins, and we'd grab the consecrated hosts from the tabernacle. And without fail, he would always bring his oversized keyboard, no matter the occasion. I loved it because he had fashioned this leather strap that he bolted right to the keyboard, and the guy could only play one song. But it was Amazing Grace, and he meant business when he played it. As with any other well-known hymn, I should say that just because he only knew that one song, it didn't mean that he couldn't play that same song 100 different ways. When we walked into the jail, you should have seen it. These guys would be behind the glass, and they get the biggest kick out of this unassuming hick carrying around a D-cell operated piano, probably thinking to themselves, what good is going to come of this? One day while setting up, he went over to the guard to inquire after an inmate he had been praying for. He turned on his heels with a smile and sat down in front of the only instrument that I think anybody ever dared to bring into that jail, and you guessed it, he began to play the opening stanza of Amazing Grace with such gusto that it took at least 3 minutes for us to get to the second bar. And I'm telling you about Bob not because he reminds me of the farmer who built bigger storage sheds, but because he did precisely the opposite. And it is his image that sticks in my mind whenever I hear anything about barns in the Gospels, or when I read about cisterns and think of silos like the one on the front of your cover with a tree growing out of it. For Bob's fields remain green and growing long after he stopped tending them and selling what he yielded. The spreaders in his yard rusted eventually, and the tractor grew weeds around its great big wheels. His silos grew sprouts, and what is true now as it was then is that sometimes it's better to be a poor farmer than it is a rich fool. And I'm not only talking about money, but the difference between what Bob knew for a fact and I think what we've only guessed at. That today's teaching is not so much about dollar bills as it is community, not so much about wealth as it is about poverty of spirit, and not so much about security as it is about having confidence in a God who is always good all the time. What we have today is a window into one's soul, a monologue in miniature, if you will. For the rich man in today's teaching has shut out everyone else from his life and his thoughts. There is no one else in the story, just the man and his possessions. That is, until God speaks to him. No sooner has he envisioned his future than God speaks and declares what the future actually holds for him, what it holds for all of us. And the reversal could not be sharper for someone seeking security that is self-made. God addresses the man as, "You fool," evoking a familiar reference to the Psalms, where the writer goes, "Fools say in their hearts that there is no God." But it is God who reminds him nonetheless. And Jesus will do much the same, reminding those who follow him that where your treasure is, that is where your heart will be also in the week ahead. My friend Bob found his treasure not in the sale of corn or soybeans, but in service. And in the beatitude that blessed are those who are poor in spirit. Bob found his treasure not hoarded in silos, but in kneeling across the bed from his wife every night as they prayed Compline together for over 60 years. And I believe Bob knew that when Shirley died in 2020, heaven's treasure became even more personal in a way that only those who have loved and lost can truly know. As such, the blessedness of those who are poor in spirit is where we learn to accept ourselves as beings who do not belong to ourselves, but to each other and to God. Not to mention that it's what you sow that multiplies, not what you keep in the barn.